We're doing it. Welcome back. This is part six, I believe, of the Poto Theater's timeline of infiltration. We've gone through ancient times, ancient societies, India, Rome, and China, and now we're up to America, Western society, European, the Great White Empire, as I always say to simplify it. And we are at 1930. We're at 1930. We're going to go to around 1960, 1930, 1960. So. What we saw leading up to this is that in 1790 you had the French Revolution. That was the start of this idea of having revolutions to get rid of all of feudal society. Throughout the history of Europe, in all class societies, there's constant rebellion. And we saw in Europe, we haven't covered it here, but we know in Europe there was the Peasants' Revolt, there was constant revolts, rebellions. But in 1790, because of the rise of the bourgeoisie and bourgeois ideology, you start to have ideas of a new society, ideas of a better society that was spread between the lower classes and the middling classes, which were the bourgeoisie of that time. It was all these people who were below the landed nobility, the landed royalty, the king and the queen, saying, let's get rid of all of it altogether and start our own society of equality. At first, that society was called, they had ideas like democracy, nationalism, republicanism. Then we saw in the 1840s that became anarchism, communism, and socialism. And we saw, starting in the 1790s, the English government was monitoring French radicals to undermine the French Revolution and to make sure it didn't spread. And they were also, at that time, they started monitoring Irish nationalists. Then we go to the 1830s and 40s. From the 1840s to the 1880s, really, we saw same thing. They began becoming more formalized, more organized about how they monitor and infiltrate anarchists, Irish nationalists, communist socialists. And we know that at the same time, all of the enslaved populations, the captive populations, were also monitored through laws and inducements to snitch on each other and protect the master. So we're going to get up to 1960, like I said today. So we're going to go from this period where we're after the first Red Scare, after the formation of what becomes the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. And J. Edgar Hoover formalizes this infiltration and monitoring of working class and lower class communities, immigrant communities. And the big concern in 1920 was black militancy. They were deathly afraid that the anarchists who they were trying to stop, the anarchist organizers, the IWW, and the Bolsheviks, the communists, they were deathly afraid that those and the black intellectuals were going to lead black folks in America to stand up to lynchings, to stand up to the Klan and fight for full equality, which would upset their whole social order. And we're going to see 40 years later in the 60s, it does just that. And still today, it's a matter of contention. So let's look at our timeline. What did I say? 1930? Yes. Okay. So 1930 now. So we have basically, we're going to see, we have Stalin, 1930s. This is before fascism, leading up to fascism. And hold on, let's share here. Here we go. Bam. So we see, let's go back. Yes, 1930s. We have the Stalin's show trials. Now, I want to emphasize, comrades, stop fighting over who's good or bad. You understand? Physically, materially, any book that we have, any idea that we have is going to be subject to an infinite range of interpretations. So there's no right or wrong. There's only what we think at any given time. So the interpretation of the books we read about Stalin is always going to change, and it's only a matter of interpretation. There's no one single truth outside of humanity. Truth is a human agreement, okay? So I'm just specifying that. When we look objectively at Russia, we see that the Bolsheviks took over the Okhrana and turned it into the NKVD, just like they took over the Tsarist army and made it the Red Army, meaning they used the generals, they used the officials to train their guys, right? So they used the old to create the new. Instead of just abolishing the machinery of the state, which a lot of people had been saying, or instead of just seizing control of the state to have a proletariat dictatorship, they took on aspects of the old society to create their society. So it's not good or bad, it's just what happened. So 1936 to 1938, 2 years. So everybody was informing on everybody. The NKV, NKVD, secret police was everywhere. Now it's one of those things where they say, Russia's a totalitarian, blah, 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 and they have secret police, and in China they have secret, secret, secret. Well, as we're seeing through this, we have our secret police everywhere, and it's more and more, and now it's our phones, right? So 1936, Spanish Civil War. So again, these conflicts are playing out. If you go back to the Russian Revolution, you see that in the Russian Revolution there was the same conflict between the Social Democrats and the Socialists and the Communists and the Anarchists, and then who ended up winning? The Bolsheviks won, and their plans got pushed through. Then, because of this, Trotsky and Stalin split after Lenin's death. So Trotsky commanded a whole bunch of people. Stalin commanded the Soviet Union. So then, the anarchists in Spain and the socialists in Spain, they were part of this whole united front against fascism that was rising up in the 30s. So the people of Spain started a revolution largely directed by the CNT, an anarchist organization. So you see at this time anarchist ideas were very big too. And so because Stalin and Trotsky were fighting to the death for control of each other's groups, right? Trotsky wanted control of everything of the USSR, of a larger socialist movement, the Comintern, whatever, and Stalin wanted to keep that under his power, so they were fighting it out in Russia. So the NKVD, that took over from the Okhrana, this intelligence organization, it undermined the Trotskyists in Spain by killing and spreading lies about communists, socialists, and anarchists. So this is why I say we have to focus on collective organizing and not on great figures and fighting over, excuse my language, big dicks, right? And at least not in an ideological sense, okay? So we see that the Spanish Civil War was infiltrated. So now we see infiltration by the communists, by the socialists, right? So now the socialists have taken power and they're using the same intelligence apparatus to undermine each other, right? So now we're in 1940s. Now we're in the U.S. sphere of influence. The U.S. Just overthrew the government of Venezuela. They've been trying to do that since the 90s. And you see in the 1940s, they wanted to overthrow the leadership in Guatemala because the Guatemalans went on strike to protest against the dictatorship of Ubico. So we know Ubico was backed by the U.S. because it's capitalist, right? They have interest, they have resources and land and fruit and all this shit. So they did everything they could to send in and sow discord. We're going to see time and time again. They want to provoke us to violence, okay? And the movement calls for a general strike. And it works, even though they're trying to undermine it. They don't succeed. The general strike works. Ubico resigns. So that's a lesson for us. Strikes work, unionizing works, controlling our labor works, right? All these crazy ideas about us dominating each other, I'm sorry, but they don't help. All of these ideas about we're going to kill people, we're going to shoot people, that's a lot of emasculated men who have been propagandized by all this violence in the media, okay? 1946, we're still in Latin America. Oh, famous Latin School of the Americas. Okay. So the School of Americas, they basically they trained people how to infiltrate the left, right? They trained in not just infiltrate like spying on, they train people how to torture, how to brutalize. See, there's we talk about grape culture, right? Grape and brutality, these are weapons of the state. These are weapons of capitalism. Because when you go into a population like they did in Chile and Argentina and other places in Latin America, El Salvador, and you violently murder people in front of the peasants, you violently grape men and women and let it be known, right? Let the word spread. That scares people away from communism and socialism, right? That scares people away from feminism. That scares the population. So it's considered to be a taboo, but we have to understand objectively that this is another function of class society, to brutalize and terrorize people, because to them we are animals, unfortunately. I mean, we're less than animals. We are the source of their wealth, the source of their power. So they'll do whatever they can to hold on to that. Now, 1950s, the U.S., in 1950, the FBI under Hoover begins the sex deviance program. So, We're going to see they start monitoring everybody, but in 1950, they're concerned about homosexuals, including LGBTQ activism. Well, so what happens is when the ruling class tells us we have rights, people want to assert those rights. When we have these ideas of the Enlightenment, of the French Revolution, of anarchism, of socialism, of communism, of opposing the bourgeoisie, of egalitarianism in general, well, everybody's going to want their rights, and so that's a concern. And there was the lavender scare after the second, or around the time of the second Red Scare in the 1950s, when they were saying that the government was undermined by homosexuals, and the homosexuals were working for the communists. So that's when it starts, okay? So we're going to see it goes into the 70s, this big concern with the queers, and they're still trying to roll back any advantage or any gains that queers have, and they're doing this, oh, there's only two genders bullshit. So now we're in Iran. Famous Iran Mossadegh, Mohammad Mossadegh takes power. He's a nationalist leader. He's a somewhat populist, left-leaning nationalist leader. But at this time, the U.S., they're fighting for the Cold War, so they have to undermine Mossadegh because he's not giving up all the resources to, Britain and the United States. Here we go. Kermit Roosevelt, who's the nephew of Theodore Roosevelt, basically a relative of Shimodoshima, who was the guy during World War II, the other Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. He's working for the CIA. So he reports that the CIA is working to counter the influence of the Iranian Tudeh Party. This was the Communist Party. You can look at their website right here, Tudeh, Tudeh, Communist Party. There's still some people who weren't killed, but we'll see. He says this includes gathering intelligence on the party to ultimately harass and nullify it. So again, this is constant. They're doing this today. I've seen this on on Instagram all the time. There's people who do not believe what they say they believe. Their whole persona is a patchwork of leftist talking points, right? And really, you see the pattern of their behavior is to get people to fight each other, to cause friction, to cause arguments any way they can. So they infiltrate the two-day party. They work with unnamed officials to infiltrate the party. They use this infiltration to give the police information on two-day activities. Kermit says they have successfully discredited the communist among the Tehran tobacco factory, right? So he's reporting case by case where they've broken the hole. So this is the thing. We think they don't understand us. They understand us. They study us night and day. I think it's in here. We're going to see under Contelpro, there's a African American informant who was infiltrating the Black Panthers, and he talks about going to bars where all these FBI guys hang out, and they study black culture incessantly, right? They study books about jazz, black history, black poetry, right? So they study the working class, they study the masses intensely to break us up and then pretend they don't know anything. That's classic passive-aggressive class power. Okay. So they're giving information. Kermit Roosevelt, he has his guys infiltrating the two-day party, giving information on two-day activities. He says they have successfully discredited the communist among. Okay, sorry. Oh yes. Also, they've getting Iranian clergy to oppose the communists. They fake a book. We're going to see they've done this time and time again. They faked literature. Again, they're faking Instagram shit, right? They're faking everything. And what they wanted to do was to make it seem like the communists were against the clergy, right? Well, you can look at all kinds of communist literature. It's not really, of course, Marx is atheism, right? But in practical situations, it's about bringing together the forces in society and not about ideological strife. So they print propaganda books to make it look like the communists hate the clergy and to cause tension. He says the CIA has produced a book which claims to be an anti-Islamic text written by the Soviets, okay? He also mentions they used their intelligence on the two-day party to set up counter demonstrations to two-day protests. So here's the thing. We're going to go down further. Then they have informants and agents provocateurs to help turn out massive demonstration for the communists. So they're setting up the opposition to the communists, and then when Truman comes, they make it look like there's a big communist presence. So in Iran, so now Truman has to do something about it, right? So this is how psychotic they are. It's all a fucking game of manipulation. You think about advertising, right? Anything they can do to get you to keep eating their shit, buying their shit, spending your money. Same thing with this. Anything they can do to stop us from coming together. We're going to see there's a quote later from a union buster, former union buster, and he says that his job was to take the collective spirit and strangle it, right? So that's what they want to do. They want to take our collective spirit and break it, okay? So um, yeah, so okay, here, 1953. Now this is very relevant, comrades, because this is going on right now. Black communist Nelson Peary. He was a World War II veteran. He was a bricklayer, a working class guy, and he says there's a case of Comrade Cummins from Toledo. So this is another thing. He says he noticed this guy comes around speaking the slang, but he doesn't really seem like he's really kind of fluent in leftist politics and leftist ideas and doesn't really have any thoughts of his own. Then he doesn't really, he doesn't, he, this guy claims to be broke, right? But he sees him pull up in a new car. So he starts to put this stuff together and thinks, hey, this guy's probably a Fed. So he goes to the higher ups in the Communist Party and they say, no, you're jealous of this guy. And then he starts to suspect that the whole party is infiltrated by the feds and they're kind of running interference for each other. And this is another thing to remember, comrades. The feds never infiltrate us alone. If there's one confidential informant, there's another, right? I've seen this in my own experience, which I'll get to later, but this is a good point here. He says the easiest way to infiltrate the party was through black informers, since accusing a black member of working for the FBI could be rebutted with accusations of racism, which was a highly sensitive issue in the party. I had an incident with this guy. I think it's Vance Lee Jones is his name. His real name, he goes by Kwamel. He's a poet in the spoken word scene in Long Beach in LA. He used to host an open mic, okay? Well, at the time I didn't think of it, but I did this poem, and he came up to me after. He's a big guy too, and he got in my face about it. He's like, you shouldn't do that poem for this black ass audience. Don't do that fucking poem. Don't you know anything for this black audience? Da da da. And so it was really weird because one, I know when a man is emasculated and afraid, right? I know that's why you'll see on my Instagram, I'm always calling out these guys for compensating for their lack of physical courage. So when a man tries to intimidate me, but he's afraid of me, it shows. And so Kwamel made it like a racial issue, but I had just done the same poem the night before for a predominantly black audience, predominantly black open mic, predominantly black space. And the host, a friend of mine, was also African American, and the poem got positive feedback, and it was about me teaching in working class black and brown communities as a working class activist, right? So the whole point of the poem was all of the disingenuous fascination with the hood, pretending it's dangerous. It's not dangerous. It's poverty. It's working class issues. So I noticed as soon as I started the poem, he started tensing up next to me. So it was really weird. I didn't get it. A year later, I was putting on a poetry show, and I had this guy who was supposed to be helping me. He didn't help me, and he kept giving me like a vibe, and it made me suspicious. I kept looking at what he was saying. He put so much effort into proving who he was. So finally, I looked him up. I figured out he was not who he said he was, but I played along for a while, and he said he wanted to bring this guy Kwamel to do this event with us. Well, then he started saying that there was an issue between the venue space, the man who owned that, and Kwamel, but it was never really clear, and he was just trying to stir up shit. And he was like, I don't want to stir up anything, but. Well, then Kwamel calls me, I get his number, I look him up, and I find out, oh, well, the guy I'm supposed to be working with is not who he's the opposite. He works for a landlord law firm, and he portrays himself as this anti-gentrification crusader well connected in the tenants union organizing scene, right? And then Kwamel, who's now appears to be working with him, right, has three separate charges of sexual misconduct, including statutory rape of minors, all guilty pleas, no time served. So he started putting together, right? So that they never work alone, right? So we have to start understanding These are very practical operations, and they're not that complicated. What they want to do is they want to get us to fight each other and do illegal shit, right? Okay. 1953, Guatemala. CIA memorandum. This was a receipt I found, like a invoice. So they spent $270,000 in 1953 dollars. That's got to be a million something today. $270,000 for undermining leftist communist forces in Guatemala and under Arbenz. The total spent on infiltration was 100,000. So they spent a lot of money. Okay, they spent a lot of money. That's the other thing is that the guy I just talked about, Quamel, aka Vance Lee Jones, and the other guy, Nathan Castellanos, aka Reese Pratt. These guys have a financial inducement to do this, right? These things are organized, they're coordinated, there's receipts, there's bills, there's time, they're punching time cards, all this shit. Okay, so we're gonna go up to 1960 here. So now we see that from the 1790s, when they were just having different government officials keep track of French revolutionaries and Irish nationalists, up till now we're gonna hit 1950s. We're in the 1950s here. We see the bourgeois state, bourgeois capitalism has evolved itself to be very highly organized so that the infiltration of the left and the suppression of the masses is highly organized. That's why get that stuff out of your head about scary spies and this stuff is an aberration, right? It's not an aberration, it's the standard. It's the standard of class society and the standard of bourgeois society, right? It's very normal, okay? So anyways, 1956 is when Contelpro starts. We all associate Contelpro with the Black Panthers because that was kind of the peak. But it was set up by Hoover, right? So after he sets up back in 1920, he set up this weekly report on the black community to disperse to everybody in the federal government. And now he's setting up COINTELPRO, which is not just monitoring, it's active counterintelligence. So you see, they set up the School of the Americas to have counterintelligence operations on the left in Latin America, and now they have this for the United States. First, they start to disrupt the CPUSA. So you see, when Nelson Peary, that we just saw, suspects the Communist Party for being infiltrated by the FBI, well, this stuff wasn't known publicly at the time, but he was right. They were infiltrating the CPUSA, and then they expanded the Socialist Workers Party, which I believe was a Trotskyist organization. Then they went to the Black Panthers and other organizations. And again, they tried to provoke violent acts, okay? Time and time again. Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll get to the quotes. So now, in Iran, after they depose Mossadegh, the CIA creates all this fucking drama to get rid of Mossadegh, just like they did in Venezuela with Maduro, right? Well, then, after Mossadegh is gone, the U.S. installs the Shah. The Shah means king, right? The king of Iran. And so then he had his secret police, right? So you see the Russians, the English, right? All these governments, they have secret police. The Tang Dynasty, they all have secret police whose job is to root out dissent, to kill by any means necessary, to provoke you to violence, all this stuff. So there's Persian people still around today, if you go to Tehangelis or in America, who will tell you that socialists from that era who left Iran or survived in Iran, they have books, black books or something. I forget what they call it, but they have books of all the people that they lost to the Savak, all the people that were disappeared by the Savak. And you see, they did the same thing in Chile after Pinochet took power, right? They disappeared, tortured, massacred, right? Killed, whatever. They did the same thing in Argentina, right? So Hitler did the same thing too, right? Every time you see they crack down on the labor organizers, the student protesters, the peasant groups, right? The feminists, the queers, always the same playbook. And right now it's happening today, comrades. Okay. So let's end it there. There were some quotes we didn't get to last time, okay? So we're seeing all of these patterns in infiltration as a phenomena of class society. 1900. This was reported by an anarchist. If you guys want to read a great book on infiltration, Read The World That Never Was by the historian Alex Butterworth. The World That Never Was. Beautiful, fucking amazing journalistic effort, right? Amazing detail. This guy's amazing. Okay. So in Russia, there's a cop, Zubatov, who had recruited the double agent Azev. He says, "We shall provoke you to acts of terror and then crush you." Isn't that what they do today, guys? Oh, when people were protesting ICE, it was riots, right? Riots, riots. Okay, comrades, you ever been to a protest? You ever organized a protest? Everything that we do when we do that stuff is to warn people there could be danger and to keep crowd control. I've done crowd control for, I think it was an anti-Trump protest or May Day rally, I forget. And that's what they had me do. Watch out. And I said, "Oh, I always know. Watch out for motherfuckers that are faded and white boys with dreads. That's what I watch out for, right?" Because we are not trying to get violent, especially when underclass people, working class black and brown people, Cambodians, Filipinos, they're already seen as violent. So, right? So they're on extra good behavior, right? So we see time and time again, they will provoke us to violence and then crush us, provoke us to do illegal things. That's one thing they do, and the other thing they do is to get us to hate each other. Right? Now, he also says, regard an informant as you would a beautiful woman with whom you are having an affair. Dote upon her. One false move can lead to her disgrace. Now, Azef was a double agent, and we'll see that, or you can just understand that, like the guys I've seen, right? We can see them, we can focus on them in their opposition to us. But think of it too, they have no community. If anybody comes from like an area with crime or gangs, and you guys know about confidential informants, they get away with shit, right? That's their claim to fame, but it's also a sickness into them, right? Because they have no community, they have no clan, they have no group, they have no family. All they have is their handlers. So they are just as likely to turn on their handlers as they are to prey on us, right? So it's a very tenuous situation. When I always say when I teach self-defense, when somebody comes at you, they expose themselves, right? So let us remember that we not to be too afraid, not to put ourselves in the position of victims, to realize they are just as vulnerable. The authorities have to work night and day to keep themselves organized and to keep their rats organized too. Okay. So 1921, we saw the creation of the what was the Phelps Baldwin Agency, the Pinkertons, MI5 in Britain, Scotland Yard, the FBI. We see all the creation of these organizations, public and private, to counter the left, to counter the opposition to the bourgeoisie. So here's another one. Burns in Teal, like Peter Thiel. Is there a connection? Girl, I wouldn't be surprised. So he's a labor spy, Albert Balin. He says all labor organizations, especially radical unions, are full of spies. The detectives have only one thing on their minds, and that is to show people that there are plots everywhere in order to squeeze money out of the rich capitalists and the government. If a spy reported that he did not find any plots, he was fired. Every spy in his reports had to invent all kinds of fictitious stories. Who does that sound like? The cops. The cops got a quota, right? So when they're patrolling Compton or Watts or, where I'm from, Norwalk, wherever, East LA, they got to make shit up if they don't have shit. They got to manufacture crimes. Why do we see this now with ICE? They started saying, oh, we're just going after the Tren de Agua, las cartelas, las zetas, or whatever the fuck. And then you see they're going after every motherfucker they can because they got quotas, right? It's money, it's work, it's power. Like I said, comrades, we get too focused on the battle of ideas and not the battle of bodies. You get me? And the battle for hunger. So in order to keep his job, so they're making up all kinds of shit. And it says the spies were at the meetings of the communists, and they were the ones who demanded to form illegal organizations to do revolutionary work. Again, you're going to be doing something like I had people come on my page say, "Yeah, Porter Theater, I agree with you. We should go kill somebody. We should get violent and take these motherfuckers out." Well, they might just be stupid heterosexual men, or they might be cops, but then maybe a lot of cops are ignorant, stupid heterosexual men. You get me? So don't let yourself get goaded, especially if you are a straight man. Don't let yourself get goaded into violence, homie. Because if you ever met some OG gangsters or some combat veterans, nobody's too eager for violence and nobody's trying to prove themselves, okay? So so the spies were the ones who demanding illegal action. A manager of the Teal agency said, If I should take away from the Communist Party all my spies, nobody will remain there, right? So it's a heavy infiltration. All letters with threats which were received by various officials during the last couple of years were written by detectives. The bombs that too were sent in 1919 through the mails and the explosion on Wall Street were the work of detective agencies. They do not care whether it is true or not as long as the story frightens the public. In connection with the communist trial in Chicago, the detectives boasted that they fixed the jury by sending letters to them threatening with death. All this being done in the name of the Communist Party, comrades. You see? You guys, what I want us to understand is that we are not our problem. I remember back around 2013, after the LAPD and connected law enforcement agencies had sent 1,500 officers into the Occupy LA encampment in City Hall in Los Angeles. There was a huge encampment, hundreds of people. I don't know, maybe 700 people. I have no idea, 1,000 people. I don't know, girl. Huge encampment. And it brought everybody together under the banner of the 99% versus the 1%. There was different fights. And of course, the cops were sending people all the time to break shit up, to slow shit down, to cause dissent. And I remember people saying, "Why did Occupy fail? Why did Occupy fail?" And I used to get so frustrated because in my head I thought, 1,500 officers, motherfucker. That's why it failed. 1,500 officers. And I think later in here, when we get to the Occupy movement, I show how it was massive coordination by law enforcement agencies. So it's you guys, it's not all or nothing. It's not the Hunger Games. It's not Harry Potter and their Voldemort. It's America, and it's always been this way. And class society has always been this way. We don't have freedom, homie. We're not free. That's why we're leftists. That's why we're revolutionaries. And so when we understand that, you understand, like I understood, like my mom, who's a refugee from Vietnam, from South Vietnam, was an anti-communist, right? When you go against the authorities, they don't forget you. When you cross the line, you cross the line, right? They might not kill you, they might not harm you, but you've crossed the line. So we should know it because they damn sure know it. That's his solidarity, comrades. I want us to remember infiltration is not complicated, but it is ubiquitous, meaning it's always going to be here until we're free, right? But it ain't that complicated. They want us to do shit they can bust us for, and they want us to alienate each other and alienate the masses. Solidarity, comrades.